is Victor Humbridge, and I am a werewolf. It seems like just yesterday, but it all started 1 month ago. I was a doctor that arrived with my wife at a village in desperate need of medical care. This was a volunteer trip that I accepted, and now this would be my biggest regret. I hated being away from my wife for so long, therefore I brought her with. The village lacked accommodation, but the folk were really warm and respectful, and I couldn't intrude. My wife and I set up our camping tent in the forest nearby. My first patient, an elderly woman named Mrs. Egret, was first on my list. But there was something very strange about this forest. I heard the sound of ropes tightening and felt droplets of blood on my shoulder, and yet I couldn't see anything. My wife thought this was the stress that was acting up, and I ignored it. I then made my way to Mrs. Egret's home, a beautiful looking home straight out of a fairy tale that I could see my wife and I spending 1 week of relaxation in there. The door was open as I entered, calling out to Mrs. Egret. A trail of blood was on the living room floor, blood that was leading outside the house through the back door. Swiftly I moved out the back while tension and panic consumed my heart. There was a creepy huntsman standing outside the home with rope in his hands. I called out to him, and he slowly turned while giving me an eerie smile that still haunts me till this day. He had a noose wrapped around Mrs. Egret's neck as her lifeless corpse lay in front of him. My eyes widened with shock, and just when I ran towards him, he vanished in a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, the feeling I had unveiled before my eyes. The beautiful, vibrant forest was an illusion. It looked more like a corner from hell. It was icy cold, yet the flames burned abundantly. The droplets of blood soaked my shoulders as I looked up and saw corpses hanging from ropes on the trees. Without hesitation, I ran to my wife as quickly as I could, trying to catch my breath each time, but the strange huntsman was already there. He looked different this time. His skin melted, and he reeked of a foul smell that would make anyone throw up. He seemed like a shapeshifter. He held his hand near my wife's throat as she cried out to me. His sharp fingernails were piercing her skin. One wrong move and she would be dead. I had no choice. I was too far away. I fell to my knees and begged and pleaded, "Please let my wife go." But it didn't seem to matter. He slit her throat and laughed sadistically while she fell to the ground. Frantically, I ran to her, trying to stop the bleeding, just the way that I was taught in medical school, but it was too late. My wife looked at me slowly and closed her eyes as she drew her last breath. I couldn't fight. I didn't know how. Nevertheless, I leaped towards the huntsman, but he changed positions. More evil and more cunning, like a demon sent from hell, and he was just that. Arkine, the demon that was banished from hell that occupied Earth just to collect souls for his return. I didn't hear everything he said, but the moment he uttered a different language, I felt my shoulder break. The sky darkened and the full moon had lit up the forest. This was an incantation, a curse of some kind that broke every bone in my body. The pain was immense. I could not breathe or scream for help. My nails grew longer, turning into sharp claws, while fur covered my entire body. I felt my mind being torn apart, memory by memory. My vision then turned dark as a grey murky film had covered my eyes. And once the incantation stopped, I fell to the ground. A large pack of werewolves stormed the forest when Arkine snapped his fingers. Minions. Just another set of his creations. My hearing seemed much more heightened than before. I felt the strength and evil power coursing through my veins. He told the werewolves to recruit me as his time was running out. Then he vanished into a wisp of smoke once more. I then looked at my fur-covered hands and clenched my fist. As the werewolves had surrounded me, I lunged at each one, clawing and biting my way through. Something had come over me. Victor Humbridge was not controlling that fight. The werewolf was, and within a few minutes I slaughtered his minions, ripped their flesh off and removed their limbs while their blood had soaked my grey fur. As blood dripped from my hands, I walked towards my wife's body. I tried crying, but I ended up howling through the forest. I held her tight in my arms and sobbed while swaying back and forth. When I somewhat composed myself, I dug a grave in the forest and buried the love of my life. I stood upright, tall and strong as the wind blew through my fur, and I roared. I made sure to channel every bit of anger and pain I had in that roar, so when it echoed through the forest, the demon Arkine would hear it and tremble in his boots. While my search for the demon continued, I saw a girl dressed in full red that walked into the forest with a package in her hand. My nickname for her was Red Riding Hood. My cover remained hidden as I did not want to frighten her. Furthermore, I was confused. Once the night passed, I wondered why I never changed back. This werewolf curse was 24/7. And then I saw Red Riding Hood walking towards Mrs. Egret's home with the package in hand. Mrs. Egret was her grandmother. Still, I could not go near her or tell her what happened just yet, but I did see Arkine lurking nearby, unaware that I was watching him. I had to be patient. He could vanish into a wisp of smoke once again. He looked weaker. Maybe his time really was running out, and I knew that I could take him. He shapeshifted into Mrs. Egret and masqueraded as Red Riding Hood's sickly grandma laying in bed. Just as he was about to devour her, I swooped in the home through the upstairs window. While the pieces of glass got stuck into my fur, Red Riding Hood was startled as she backed away to the wardrobe. I grabbed Arkine and threw him out the window. Perhaps this was his true form, an ugly yet terrifying monster with tentacles and horns on his body. Or was this just one more shape-shifting trick to frighten me? I knew that I was stronger. If I could defeat so many of his werewolves, clearly his curse did not work as intended. Our battle was long and painful, but I slew him where he stood. His new monster form made him even more weaker. Red Riding Hood and I spoke for a short bit, and I explained what happened. Then towards her departure, her eyes looked different. It was almost like she was not human anymore. I turned and looked at the spot where Arkine's body was, and he had disappeared. The moment I saw her return to the village, I knew the truth will not be told. I knew Arkine, in the body of Red Riding Hood, will blame me for the murder of Mrs. Egret. I mean, after all, it became easier to pin everything on the big bad wolf. Ugh, the goddamn fleas. Anyway, I then walked towards the village to meet Arkine head on. He was weak and hid among the townfolk like the coward that he was. But my human self stopped me from walking any further. How could I enter? I was a werewolf, and people would automatically see me as a threat. What if my rage and bloodlust was a defense mechanism? Should the village folk die at my hands for a revenge they had no part in? We were at a stalemate. You see, Arkine knew that I would not let them die, and they were his only cover protecting him from me. The longer he stayed there, the weaker he got, and his clock to return to hell was ticking. It wasn't long till word spread that I committed the murders, and then the villagers stormed the forest with silver weapons and torches in hand. To avoid the loss of innocent lives, I retreated by running swiftly like the wind to a different part of town in the woods nearby. This woods was darker, musty, and much colder. There was a cave that I sought comfort in, trying to formulate a plan just to get Arkine out of the village. I emerged from a cave to hunt for food, and that is when I saw two people, a man and woman, calling out names as they frantically ventured the woods. It seemed like they lost their kids. However, their faces were damaged with stitches on their skin, as if they just had surgery. The scent had led me to an isolated home in the woods when I saw two kids staring out the window directly at me. but I could feel a presence behind me, and this was truly odd because I didn't hear anything. And before I knew it, an elbow found the back of my head, which brought me down to one knee. At first glance, it looked like a 5'9" ordinary man that was quite pale with scars on his face and looked very slender while wearing a long black coat. But when I caught a glimpse of his fangs, I knew that he was a vampire. It seemed like he kidnapped the kids and held them hostage. The vampire and I battled in the cold and musty woods, exchanging blows. I felt my nose break when he kneed my face, and he winced in pain when I tore a chunk of flesh from his stomach. For a 5'9" slender man, he sure was powerful to take me on. And then the fight came to a halt when the kids ran out and stood in front of the vampire and begged me to stop. I immediately hid my claws and said, "What's going on here?" And that was when I found out that the vampire was protecting the kids, and the two humans that wandered the woods were actually cannibals that kidnapped them, and the little ones had escaped. Before we knew it, we were surrounded by a horde of cannibals. Creepy and eerie looking people with pieces of skin from others they've eaten stitched on their faces. Their teeth were rotten and their nails dirty and long. The vampire and I stood back to back while the kids were between us. No harm would come to them. We made sure of that. The cannibals stood no chance. The vampire and I cut through the air, lunging, leaping, and swiftly killing them while their screams of torment had traveled the forest. I removed the heads of the two cannibals that kidnapped the little ones. The kids were tired, and the vampire left them in his home to rest for a bit while he and I spoke. Fulian was his name, a vampire cop that worked the night shift for obvious reasons. I explained my dilemma to him and he suggested that I took the kids back home to their town. There was a witch that lived there, Myra, who was the mother of the little ones. She helped Fulian with his bloodlust, and he was sure that she would guide me in the right path. At the break of dawn, the vampire bid me farewell while the little ones walked out the house and held my hands on either side. They felt safe and comforted by me, which made me feel at peace. I always wanted a son and daughter, but the irony that night, there was a werewolf and a vampire in the woods, yet the real monsters were those human cannibals that kidnapped the kids. And so the little ones and I began our trip back to their hometown. Now, my dear friends, shall we continue my story? The little ones and I reached their hometown, and it was truly beautiful. The wooden houses were built spectacularly, giving a warm, sophisticated look. The mist made the town darker, but the dim lights made me feel comfortable and content for once. The vampire was right. The folk in this town were not bothered by me one bit. In fact, they were warm, kind, and very respectful to me. Perhaps they've seen and dealt with far worse. Unfortunately, Myra was not in. She left last night in search for her kids. The little ones then spent a few minutes in Myra's library and walked out with a book in hand. "Mr. Wolf," they said, "while you wait for Mom, perhaps this book would answer the questions that you may have." I then gave a small smile and thanked them. I became really fond of those two. The townfolk told me not to worry, as they would send a raven to Myra which would tell her that the kids were back home and there's a visitor waiting to see her. Everyone was relieved that the kids were okay, and they kept thanking me. They even offered to bathe me, and rightfully so. I smelled horrible. But I could not live in the homes in this town. They looked too neat and tidy for a monster like me to live in. I therefore opted for the forest a few meters behind us, where we entered, while they filled my wooden barrel with water. Strange, the forest just felt like home. I was particularly fond of the shampoo they gave me. It had a scent of lavender and rosemary, which scrunched my nose due to my heightened smell, but it was better than smelling like a wet dog. The fleas would finally be removed. Werewolves, monsters, and demons. Bring them on, but fleas, no thank you. I then got out of the barrel and loosely dried myself with a towel while the breeze cooled down my body. I opened the book the little ones gave me titled Werewolf Prophecies. The pages were old and fragile, crumpled parchment. There were many prophecies in the book, but only one that was titled The Grey Wolf, and the story was exactly like mine. A man of virtue and honor would have a stroke of misfortune and be cursed by the demon Arkine in the forest. I wish you all knew how terrifying it is having your life documented in front of you, like some sick game of destiny. The curse, however, according to the book, would not be reverted. The Grey Wolf would spend the rest of his life as this monster. The werewolf will be gifted with long life and heightened senses such as touch, smell, speed, sight, and power, more so than a werewolf that has been turned by another. Furthermore, there would be an equal balance in the werewolf and human. Now, this would take some time to get used to, but the monster would never fully take over the human and vice versa. In battle, the werewolf would take control, and in matters involving human skills, the man would play his part proudly. The chapter then mentions Arkine, a demon that was feared among his very own family, which explained his banishment. In order to defeat Arkine, I had to find and kill 5 of his most precious and strongest creatures. These were the monsters that he was banished for, as it broke the supernatural law. No supernatural entity shall bring his or her minions to Earth. Number 1 was Hilno, a hybrid humanoid insectoid creature, smaller than the others but the fastest. His sharp, jagged edges and spikes were not something to take lightly, usually found near lakes and rivers. I wonder if a stone creature's neck could break. I guess we have to find out. Number 2 was Lazario, the first lizard monster that was ever created and rumored to be over 5,000 years old. Its whiplash of a tail was its greatest strength, with its venomous tongue. The conspiracy theory of the lizard people in the world were rumored to be descendants of this particular creature. Well, I guess I am having lizard for supper. Number 3 was Memnon, Arkine's most dumbfounded yet extremely powerful creature. Its sheer size could make an entire forest tremble. Extreme caution is advised. While the creature's intellect is severely poor, bringing it down is nearly impossible. There was only one werewolf in history that did so and cut a large chunk of its body in half, but the creature was healed by Jorah. Number 4 was me. Well, more like an evil clone of me. You see, the stronger that I got in battle since I was cursed would be transferred to this evil version of myself. The only thing that would give me an extra edge in this fight would be my strategy and tactfulness in defeating this particular werewolf. I've slaughtered a few before. Let's see what this one has to offer. Last but not least was Jorah, the daughter of Arkine. A despicable, terrifying and disturbing creature. Survival is 0. No previous werewolf in the legend, cursed just like me, has ever been able to defeat Jorah. Perhaps this is due to the battle taking place in Purgatory itself. Strengths and weaknesses unknown. And then I paused. There were a few more pages left in the chapter, but there was a foul scent in the town. Something evil and unfamiliar to me. I felt my eyes light up as the werewolf had taken control. The fur behind my neck stood, and now my ears pointed upwards. I closed the book and then took a lean back posture, making sure that I got enough spring from my leap. I continued snuffing and trying to hear anything else. I had to be cautious here. This could be one more of Arkine's traps, and it seemed so because there were no screams from the townfolk. My werewolf hind legs had lunged me into the air while I ran as quickly as I could. The truth be told, This was the first time that I ran on two legs, and yet my speed was just as quick, especially when the trees passing me by was a blur. And finally, I reached the entrance of the town and stopped dead in my tracks. The little ones walked towards me and asked, "What is the matter, Mr. Wolf? You seem troubled." I then handed them the book as I didn't want it to get damaged. "There," I said, "in the distance, are those two puppies pets of someone in the town?" The kids had a terrified expression on their face. "Puppies," they said. "Can you describe them?" I was confused as I pointed. "Right there, can you not see them?" The kids turned around and trembled with fear. "No, we cannot," they softly muttered. "Oh, look," I said. "They seem to have increased in size, the size of normal dogs now." The kids ran into the town, ringing the bell and shouting at the top of their lungs for everyone to evacuate. As I watched them all run frantically past me into the forest, my confusion grew. The dogs became bigger, way bigger than the tallest house in the town. "Can you at least see them now?" I asked. The kids ran towards me with panic in their strides and pulled my fur. Mr. Wolf," they said, "run." "But why?" I asked. "Why am I the only one that can see them?" The dogs were now enormous. Their eyes glowed orange and their teeth were the biggest and sharpest that I have ever seen. Something from nightmares. The kids said, "Because they are not dogs. You are being hunted by the bloodhounds from hell."